Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, what I have for you today is the story of a person who did not exist. This non-existent person lived in the US since 1978, and they had a string of personas. He was the son of an actress, he was a television producer, he was afraid he was going to be sent to the front lines of the Cold War. He had the same social security number as David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, and he was a relative of the Rockefellers, one of America's wealthiest families. With all of that, the only thing that was true was that he was a kidnapper and a killer. Some man for one man. This is a real tale of lies and deceit and all that great stuff. So, without further, let's give it a go. There are a few characters in this story, about 1 million personas, so it's kind of hard to nail down where to begin. But how about we begin with where and when it all came crashing down? Or rather, the first, domino to fall. That was in May 1994 in San Marino, California, and in the backyard of this beautiful house in San Marino, you know, that wealthy, exclusive location, in the backyard of a beautiful house there, a pool was being dug up. They had, the construction equipment out, getting ready to dig. I mean, essentially, it's a big hole in the ground. I can't imagine it's too complicated. That's how much I know about construction. But while they were digging away, they hit a snag. Yikes. A snag in the shape of bones. So that's double yikes, I guess, right there. See, they were, scooping. And they hit something hard. They went over to see what it was in this back garden, and it was a plastic container, which they were not expecting to find, obviously. And so they went over, they had a go. They opened it up, and inside was a bag. Pulled those yolks out. What's inside? Bones. Bones were inside. Human remains. The decomposition was pretty ripe, you might say. So whoever this was, whoever this had been, they had been there for some time before they were discovered in May 1994. So the police investigation began, because I don't think you can say natural causes in a plastic container, chopped up bones. Now, the owner of the home was obviously questioned, what do you know about this? But the owner of the home, they had only been living there a couple of years, not terribly long, and this container of bones had certainly been there longer than the new owner had lived there. So the police were like, okay, well, who owned this house before you? Well, the person who had owned that beautiful San Marino house had unfortunately passed away 6 years earlier in 1988. But maybe there might be some police reports about, could link to those bones. See, while looking through their records about that address and who had lived there, the police found something very interesting. The previous owner of that house was a woman named Dee Dee Sohus. And Dee Dee Sohus had, back in 1985, so 9 years before the bones were found, filed a missing persons report for her son Jonathan Sohus and his new wife, Linda. Okay, so was this Jonathan or Linda buried in the backyard? What happened? See, Dee Dee had lived with her son and his new wife, Linda. They didn't get on too great though, but one day, back in late 1984, John and Linda told Dee Dee they had just been hired. Both of them had just gotten new jobs to go to Europe and work on this new US government top secret program. I mean, I guess back in late 1984, it was the height of the Cold War, so, John, he had worked in computers as well, and, computers were kind of just taking off, so something to do with that. It was top secret, they couldn't tell anybody. It was a sudden thing. John and Linda, they jetted to Europe, Over the next couple of weeks and couple of months, they would send back postcards back to Dee Dee in San Marino, wish you were here, pictures of Paris and Berlin and blah 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 blah. But after a while, the postcards stopped. Dee Dee never heard from her son or his wife again. And so in 1985, about 5 months after John and Linda left, Dee Dee filed a missing persons report for her son. And Dee Dee, good old Dee Dee over here, what a woman, she told the police when they were following up on this missing persons report that a tenant of hers, who also lived in that house, but in a guest house out back, that tenant had helped her son and his wife get that new job. So maybe, this tenant guy, he might know something about where they are, where they've gone to work, anything. Because she hadn't heard in some time. So the police then wanted to talk to this guy. Maybe he could help with a missing persons report, right? And his name was Christopher Chichester. He was a film student in USC, but he was now gone. He had just upped and left. So this is Christopher Chichester, whoever he was. He became, a persons of interest in this missing persons report, but you know what I mean? He had left no contact information, no nothing. So the police couldn't follow up with him and find out where he was to ask him some questions about, these two missing people. John's truck had also disappeared. Dee Dee didn't know where it had gone, but she thought maybe Christopher, John had given it to Christopher in return for helping him out with the job, and he had gone off with it. And so this missing persons case went cold. Maybe they were in Europe, and who knows? In 1988, Dee Dee Sohus, she passed away. And that same year, there was a break in the case of missing John and Linda. John's truck was found. It was found on the other side of the country, though, in Connecticut. So they tracked down Jonathan Sohus' truck to Connecticut, and there, they were able to determine that the truck was owned by one Christopher Crowe. So what the police in San Marino did was send kind of like a packet of information to police in Connecticut with pictures and information and all that to see if maybe they knew Christopher Chichester around there. And then the police in Connecticut said, Christopher Chichester is Christopher. Same guy. But then he was gone again. As soon as the police went to follow up with Christopher Crowe, he vanished. A while later, he was tracked down to a securities firm in New York City. Kidder, Peabody, & Co. Prestigious. But once again, when the police arrived to speak with Christopher Crowe, he was gone again. They would go up to his office, he would always be busy or out of the office, and once again, he vanished. He suddenly just upped and left. He told his bosses that his parents had gone missing in Afghanistan, and so he needed to go find them. He'd be looking for a while. This Christopher was a chameleon, and now he had vanished 3 times. He had vanished in San Marino, he had vanished in Connecticut, and he had vanished in New York, and the police just needed to speak with him to see if he knew anything about Jonathan and Linda Sohus. And Dee Dee, when she was alive, she didn't know too much about him. So once again, the case went cold. He was the only person of interest they had in this missing persons investigation, and he himself was now a missing person, essentially. That was until May 1994, when bones were found in the Sohus backyard. It was determined that the victim had died from blunt force trauma and stab wounds, and then had been chopped up and buried. The bones were unable to be DNA tested. That was because Jonathan, he was actually adopted, so the DNA in the bones, they had nothing to kind of compare it to. But, judging from the size of it and some of the other items, it was determined that that was probably Jonathan Sohus. Linda? Where was Linda? Nobody knew. But now the hunt for Christopher was back on, because what had once been, a person of interest in a missing persons case was now a person of interest in a homicide and missing persons case. But he hadn't been seen in many years. The mystery of John and Linda Sohus remained just that. It was even featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in 1995.
May 1994, San Marino, California, just north of Los Angeles. Excavation for a backyard swimming pool came to an abrupt halt when workmen made a grim discovery. John and Linda still lived with John's mother, Dee Dee Sojas, by all accounts an alcoholic. However, the most intriguing character would prove to be a mysterious young man who went by the name Christopher Chichester.
Someone fitting Christopher Chichester and Christopher Crowe's description, though, would make the news all around the place. 14 years later, in July 2008, in Boston, there had been a kidnapping. See, Clark Rockefeller was walking with his very young daughter towards Boston Common while on a supervised visit, and a social worker had been there with them. When all of a sudden he pushed a social worker to the ground, he picked up his daughter and he booked it into a car and he fled.
Officials in New York are patrolling these waters just in case a father accused of abducting his 7-year-old daughter comes back. Police say Rockefeller is known to use a number of different aliases and add they are not quite sure what he does for work or if he even has a valid social security number.
See, Clark Rockefeller had been married to a woman named Sandra Boss. They had been through a very bitter and acrimonious divorce, and so hence the supervised visitation he had with his daughter. So that's the 4th time this person vanished, only this time he wasn't alone. Clark Rockefeller married Sandra Boss in 1995. His surname doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him there. See, he claimed he was a distant relative of the wealthy and prestigious Rockefellers. He had the letters in his name, but he didn't have the numbers in his bank account. He claimed he was orphaned at a young age. His parents burned to death in a car fire when he was a kiddo, and so he didn't really know the rest of the family. Sandra was a big dog at a consulting company on Wall Street. Clark claimed to own a non-profit. They lived together in New York City before moving to a more rural New Hampshire. Clark was a gregarious fella, always loved meeting people, a charming guy, and he was delighted to welcome a daughter with Sandra. They moved to Boston in 2006. They moved there because they wanted their daughter to grow up in a more, less rural place with more other kids her age. And pretty soon after, Sandra and Clark would start fighting a lot. They would start fighting over their daughter, and Sandra would claim Clark was extremely controlling, emotionally abusive, would be roaring off the top of his head if he didn't get what he wanted. And Sandra said here, "I've had enough of you, pal." That divorce was a little bit rocky, and so it was also around that time Sandra started to learn a few things about her husband Clark Rockefeller. One thing was that he said his mother was Anne Carter, a child actress from the 40s. Now remember, he said that both of his parents died in a car fire when he was very young. Only a quick search would find out that this Anne Carter, he claiming, child actress he claimed was his mother, was in fact still alive. During the marriage, it seemed like this Clark wanted to stay off the books as much as possible, taxes, and so on and so forth. So the divorce would end, with Clark getting $800,000, Sandra getting custody, but Clark would get a number of supervised visits throughout the year. It was during one of those supervised visits that Clark fled with his daughter, kidnapping her and spawning a police investigation. He was tracked all the way to New York City's Grand Central Station, and he was gone. During the investigation, the FBI, they became involved, and then the FBI, looking up this Clark Rockefeller, would find out he did not exist. No one who knew him could say who he was, or where he was from, or really anything about him, other than what he had told them. They had no other, proof. Even the Rockefellers themselves were questioned, and they had never heard of any distant Clark Rockefeller. So, Christopher Chichester becomes Christopher Crowe, becomes Clark Rockefeller. But who was this person? Well, during this whole kidnapping investigation, a fingerprint was found, and that fingerprint linked to one Christian Gerhartsreiter. He, at 17 years of age, moved to the USA from Germany in 1978. His story is very interesting, and I haven't even told the half of it. By the way, do you remember Albrecht Muth, who I covered a couple of months back? He too, his compatriot, it's like this is the second German con man, fraud person who just invents their identity. Ein Gott! At the end of this, it's going to turn out Germany isn't even real. Christian was born in Bavaria, West Germany, in 1961, in the small town of Bergen in the Alps. He was an unknown presence in the town, short, skinny, quiet kid, prone to fantasy. His dad an artist, his mother a seamstress. Completely by chance, one day he was on a train, and he just started, yapping away to this lovely American couple who were visiting Germany. And during that conversation, they said to him, hey, listen, if you're ever across the Atlantic, here's our address in Connecticut, come on over. Be happy to have you. They probably, said it in that way, not actually expecting him to show up, which he did. In December 1978, he showed up on their doorstep one day with his bags packed and said, hey, I'm here. He said, he was here on exchange, and this family enrolled him in their local school, and now he was ready to reinvent himself. He didn't want to be Christian Gerhartsreiter anymore. He was gonna create this new persona, start fresh in this new America, no longer pursued by memory. He began calling himself Christopher Gerhartsreiter, and he would say he was son of a German tycoon. He liked the finer things in life. Well, he'll get used to that because, he every morning his breakfast had to be ready for him. He better have those sausages ready. He needed his clothes always had to be freshly pressed. He was sleeping on the couch this entire time, but he was already acting like a rich douchebag. Soon, he became Chris Gerhardt, shortening the name, and began studying at the University of Wisconsin, studying film. He would marry another student there simply for the green card in 1981. She didn't even know him that well, but basically he was like, if you don't marry me, I'm going to be sent to the Eastern Front to fight the Russians, like this was World War II or something. Divorce swiftly followed. He didn't even finish his studies at the University of Wisconsin before he was up and gone again, this time to Los Angeles. Well, Christopher Chichester moved to Los Angeles. He basically inserted himself into high society in San Marino. By the way, the entire lesson of this story is you can do whatever you want so long as you are ballsy enough. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Be confident, and life's a breeze. He just walked into society dinners, weddings, country clubs, and just was like, hey, I'm here. He'd be charming, he'd be gregarious, and everybody loved him. He pretended he belonged there, and it worked. He even got his own card. What do you think? Impressive. Very nice. Let's see Clark Rockefeller's card. He claimed he was from British royalty now, and he got into the City Club, which is basically where all the top dogs would be. Although people noticed some things that were kind of odd about him. One was that basically he drove a real shitty car. And the car was filled with post-it notes everywhere. All reminders for him about who he was claiming to be. It's like Memento, where he has to write down the things on his body, only I guess it's kind of a less permanent thing. But he needed to keep his story straight, and that's how he did it, so he was always, oh yeah, that's me. He got in somehow to USC, although there's never any proof he enrolled, and he began renting a guest house from one Didi Sohus. John and Linda moved into that house shortly after they married also. John and Linda would soon disappear after they started asking a lot of questions about Chris Chichester. John had suspicions that this Chris Chichester was also robbing his mother, who was an elderly woman who was a bit of a drinker, so easy to kind of take advantage of. In fact, it's been reported he wasn't paying rent at all and was probably pocketing whatever he could. Also around that time, a neighbor mentioned that this Chris borrowed a chainsaw. John and Linda one day left to go to Europe on this new top secret job they couldn't tell much about, And shortly after he left San Marino, he said he had to return to England, that some family members had died and he had to, tend to the estate. Posh boy that he was. Not long after then, the police showed up looking for John and Linda. He had moved to Connecticut, driving Jonathan's car, and once again inserted himself into high society. I'm talking yacht clubs, I'm talking golf clubs, I'm talking country clubs, the whole shebang. He was now Christopher Crowe, he told people, a TV producer from LA. Now, there was in fact a real Christopher Crowe who was a TV producer in LA, so he essentially stole somebody else's identity, but if anybody looked it up, they'd be like, oh yeah, he's a real person. You can see his credits. He ended up getting a job working in computers, a job he didn't have for very long because the social security number he gave his employers happened to be the same social security number of David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. I don't know if that was intentional or he just kind of gave them a random social security number and it happened to be that one. The police almost caught him again in Connecticut following Jonathan's truck, but he was gone. Now he was in New York City. There he was earning thousands of dollars. He had somehow, peak bullshitter that he is, he'd somehow bullshitted his way into a securities firm. Doing all this, whatever securities firms do. Money, Wall Street, that. He didn't impress the staff though, because although he could bullshit his bosses into the job, the people under him were like, you haven't got a fucking clue what you're doing. He left then to work for Kidder, Peabody & Co., a job he would have to leave again soon when the police tracked him there. He had to go to Afghanistan, apparently. What he did after that, for a number of years, is completely unknown. But he would re-emerge then as Clark Rockefeller. And then to 2008, now he was on the run.
Clark, although things have changed, you will always be Ray's father, and I will always be Ray's mother. We both love her dearly and have only her best interests and well-being at heart. I ask you now, please, please bring Snooks back. There has to be a better way for us to solve our differences than this way. I also want to thank everyone for your help. And Ray, honey, I love you. I miss you so much. And remember, you're always a princess.
He was eventually tracked down to Baltimore. A real estate agent saw, him on the TV and on the ads, looking for him. And she called the FBI saying she had just sold a house to a shipsmith. The FBI surrounded that house and arrested him. His daughter was safely returned to Sandra. After running his entire life, he was now in irons.
Who else were you? You were Rock. Who else were you?
I couldn't even remember. I couldn't even remember. It's just like,
if you had to put a number on how many different names you've used in your lifetime, how many would you say?
Oh, no, Rockefeller is always the big. Was always
you get the most bang for your buck.
No, I mean, that was always sort of my general name.
So what's your real name?
Well, that is it. That's the name that I'm using. So, and I mean, that is my real name.
Were you born James Clark Rockefeller?
Probably not.
Do you remember what your mom and father looked like as a child? Do you think you were orphaned?
Couldn't tell you.
He went on trial in 2009 for kidnapping his own daughter.
Mr. Rockefeller migrated into a true delusional state in which he actually believed that these things about him were true.
He was convicted and he got 4 to 5 years.
We, the jury, say that the defendant is guilty of offenses charged.
But now, finally, after many, many years, they had Christopher Chichester, aka Christopher Crowe, aka Clark Rockefeller, aka Christian Gerhartsreiter, for the disappearance of John and Linda Sohus back in 1984 in San Marino. DNA technology had advanced enough that they were able to confirm it was Jonathan Sohus found. Linda remains missing to this day. But the police were sure both had been killed by Christian. But it was hard for some people to see how this lifelong con man who was never violent, go from that to double murderer.
News is following developing news. The man who calls himself Clark Rockefeller is now facing charges from a 1985 murder in California. Rockefeller, whose real name is Christian Gerhartsreiter, drew national attention when his mysterious past was exposed during a parental child abduction case in Massachusetts. Prosecutors say he killed 27-year-old John Sohos when he was living in a San Marino guest house owned by Sohos. But Gerhartsreiter's lawyer says he's innocent.
But he had borrowed a chainsaw, something he never used any other time. The lawn had also been dug up around the time of the disappearance. He said he was having some work done, pipes were busted. One of the bags the body John had been wrapped in was from the University of Wisconsin, where Christian went, and another bag was from USC, a familiar haunt of his. Bloodstains would also be found under the carpet in the guest house he had stayed in. In 2011, he was charged with murder. He was convicted of Jonathan Sohos' murder. He was sentenced to 27 years to life. He maintained his innocence. He wasn't charged with Linda Sohos' murder, as I said, even to this date, her body's never been found, and he claims, Linda, she's still out there, she's still on the run. In fact, he said it was Linda who killed Jonathan, not him. She had murdered her husband and then left, which was probably not true.
I want to assert my innocence, and that I firmly believe that the victim's wife killed the victim, but be that as it may, once again, I did not commit the crime of which I stand accused. Convicted.
And so ends the story of Clark Rockefeller, or whatever you want to find him. Probably the biggest con man I've ever covered. It's a crazy story. Even more so than Albrecht Muth, and that was a crazy story already. A man who lived lie after a lie, and was happy out with that. A man who would kill to hide the truth. Twice, it would appear. And even when arrested, he couldn't say who he was. He probably doesn't know himself. Fair play to him though, on one hand. As I said, if you dress the part, act like you belong there, and just bullshit, you can more or less get away with literally anything. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here with me. It really means a lot, and I hope you found this story as interesting as I did. And yeah, here, listen, go on. If you want to watch some more of my videos, that'd be great. If not, that's okay too. Listen, please take care of yourselves and look after each other, because I love you. Mike out.